Welcome to the introduction episode of We Talk Story podcast. Caleb Bannister sat me down this time to talk about the why of the podcast. We cover my growing up years in apartheid South Africa, living cross-culturally in a coloured community in the Western Cape, and me coming to terms with being an Afrikaner. Caleb and I traveled to different nations around the world, and he remembers the first time I told my story in a church in Barbados and why I had to hide for a while in Madagascar. There's a lot more in this episode of We Talk Story, so enjoy.
Hey everybody, my name is Caleb Bannister, and I am doing this podcast with Louise Schoeman. And it's been such an honor. I've known her since 2015, so that's about 6 years. And we've had the honor and privilege of traveling to several countries throughout Asia, Europe, Africa, and throughout North America. Louise, do you want to give a shout out?
Hi. It's so great and quite interesting to be on the other side of the mic today, but I'm excited.
Yeah, to be honest, I'm a little nervous, but it's all good. No, we're just going to talk story. And speaking of stories, ooh, what a good segue. What you've been doing, Luis, for the past, this has been something that's been in the making for months now. But you've started something called S Stories, which has been showing the beauty of cultural redemption through sharing it through podcasts. And what you've been capturing are other people's stories. And, I think I was one of your first guests on the podcast, and then we had our good friend, sister Caitlin Omack as well. And what you've done so well through S Stories has just been capturing different elements of one story of how they had to overcome challenges. And so S Stories really, the audience goes to so many different people, whether they are struggling with their identity or just curious with their identity, curious with what more there may be for them. And so S Stories has been a phenomenal podcast series. And in the beginning stages, we've already been seeing and hearing responses. And so it's an honor, Louise, to be doing this with you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a correction. So my website is called sstories.co, and that's basically a blog with different stories and different angles. And then We Talk Story is basically then the podcast segment of S Stories. So
That's
yeah,
it.
you're
We
right.
talk stories. You know
Yeah.
what? When there's too many stories involved, but that's it. We talk stories. We're on different platforms. I listen to it on Spotify. But
That's
yeah,
great.
well, a bit about my relationship with you. Like I said, I've known you for 6 years, and Luis, I think throughout the 6 years, you've always been someone that's been very creative, and I know you've always enjoyed creativity. And so, for our listeners, this isn't just once again something that is a spur of the moment, but that this has been creativity that has been in the works. And
Yeah.
Luis, I know we're going to hear more of your story as a white South African, Afrikaner, who has grown up in interesting times of history. And so we're going to get to hear a lot of your story. And I'm excited. So if you're listening now, I want to encourage you to have your ears really open and your heart open, because Luis has some phenomenal things to share. So Luis, with all of that being said, nerves aside, goodness, tell me a bit about yourself. Little background.
Yeah, so my name is Louise Schoeman, as Caleb said, and I basically grew up in South Africa. I grew up in the Eastern Cape and in a farming community, and it was really on the edge of the old Transkei. So I basically grew up in the apartheid years for my whole school years. The year after high school, apartheid basically ended in South Africa. So
Wow.
I grew up in a world that was very segregated, with very specific areas where specific people stayed. We stayed the town I grew up was a mixture of Afrikaners and English South Africans from British descent.
Hmm.
And then basically it was a Xhosa area, but then the indigenous people of the land, the San people, were also there, and they were the colored people. And I basically, we shared a language, me, the Afrikaners and the colored people. So
Hmm.
yeah, that was the people and the environment that I grew up in. I grew up in a school that was just white, a small school from grade 1 to 12, and we were a bunch of Afrikaner kids going to school, and some of them left to go to bigger bigger schools. Yeah, and yeah, the town just grew smaller and smaller towards the end of apartheid, in a sense, because of the things
Wow.
happening around in the world and in South Africa. Um, in my high school years, I have memories of seeing the kids from the black area of our town doing some riots and coming into town, and our school was, or our town was, sort of like we were up on the one side of a mountain, and they were sort of up at the hill on the other side, so we could sort of see each
Wow.
other.
Wow.
And there were a season even that the commandos was basically local farmers and local men that was had to protect our school. And
Wow.
there was even the Peace Corps that came in at one point, just being in town. That was towards the end of apartheid. Yeah, and that is sort of the introduction, in a sense, of where stories is from, because of seeing all this and trying to make sense of that for myself in the years that followed.
Luis,
Yeah.
this is out of a movie. So for some of our listeners who are listening, you might not know, but South Africa, there's a lot of there's a lot of black people. I think the four what national they would say would be white, Indian, colored, and blacks. So with whites as a minority, Luis, how
Mhm.
was it that there was such a turnaround? You know?
Mm. Well, I mean, I guess everybody knew that at some point people in South Africa just realized it was no way that you could, with a minority, try and holding that kind of control over
Mm,
a whole nation with so many people that was actually, in a sense, not given the opportunities that my people had, and it was not sustainable. And at that point in history, the whole world sanctioned us, in a sense. So that was the reality of it. But I'm also thankful for really wise people and people that God really orchestrated in that time to come and play a vital role. And I think the two people, like everybody knows, is Mr. Nelson Mandela and Mr. F.W. de Klerk, and then a lot of people around them that played a big role, and even people from outside that came in that time, transitioning. Even in the years after the end of apartheid, that transition period, there was amazing wise people that actually came into the country and helped with trying to transition that thing,
wow.
in a sense. And we all know, and the whole world was expecting
Yeah.
a bloodbath to happen, and it didn't happen. It's really God's
Mm.
grace. Um,
I,
yeah,
I like you sharing that because when I met you 2015, you were working with a team that was all colored, yeah?
yeah,
So
yes.
what was that like being a white woman working on a team that did not have a lot of white people? I think there was one other white lady who's the leader.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I must say, I think I didn't really know what it meant to go and live in a community that's from a whole different community. And the funny thing is, we share
Mm.
a language. We should actually understand each other quite well. But the reality
Wow.
is, language and language is two different things. And
Hmm.
it was, I'll be honest, there was moment that was really challenging, really to understand each other, what each other was saying. Actually, I mean, the culture, the way they do things was just so different. I remember I mean, I can be very task orientated, very focused, and I remember many
Which
times.
always pushed me to being better. Thank you, Louise.
But I remember many times going into the office and I need to get something done, but I had to always say myself in, take a
I
moment,
shame.
and no, I need to do the relational route, and
Ew. Have a
go
cup
through,
of tea, sit down.
yeah, have a nice chat. I mean, that was hard for me, but I think
Yeah.
also in that time, it was the times of my greatest laughters, moments of so much
Mm,
joy. I
wow.
mean, it was many times very heartbreaking as well for me,
Mm,
just to see the breakdown in communities because of what apartheid, the heritage of apartheid for specific people
mm,
groups and specific communities
wow.
to see it. Because yeah, maybe I need to paint a picture a little bit of where I was. I was in
Yeah.
Worcester. The
Mm,
community's name is Roodeval,
mm,
and Roodeval, or Worcester had a lot of gang problems over the years. In
mm,
the 80s, early 90s, the gangs were really, really vicious, and they were very territorial. And
mm,
the in Roodeval was a primary school for the colored people, but then a high school was in a different gang's territory, and the kids couldn't finish couldn't go into high school because it was too dangerous for them. And at that time, God raised a lady called Irena van Deventer, and she was a social worker, and that she started to work with the gangs and organize soccer games and things like that to
wow.
build relationships between the different gangs. So she took them out of that environment to a farm, and they
Wow.
would play soccer games, and they could sort of fight that out on the soccer field and build relationship. And later
Mm,
on, the gangs would actually they would recognize each other and they would help each other to go into the other's territories. And
sure.
they actually they got to a point of peace at that time. And
And
so,
she was a
yeah,
white lady. She was a white
yeah,
lady?
she's an Afrikaner white lady. It's
Wow.
really amazing. I would love to do and tell a story, let her tell a story herself soon here
Wow.
as well.
Have you ever wondered why your cultural identity is so important? Well, we have a free resource. In this free resource, it will give you 2 good reasons on why cultural identity should be trendy. You will also gain a clarity and confidence in who you are. Lastly, you will know exactly when it is your time to shine. Follow the My Time to Shine link in the show notes. There's so much. There's literally so much that we could talk
Yeah,
about. And
yeah,
one thing I want to make sure I say is or ask you is how did you deal with say because I know you were the team you were a part of was a performing arts team. So how did
yeah,
you deal with things when it came up with guilt and shame for
yeah,
what your people had done? Like
yeah.
how was that relation and how did that affect your relationship with the team?
Yeah, so I mean, I think where the conflict so many times came in was just how we approached each other in our communication styles. And
Hmm.
that is really the heritage from our people. They always were farm owners and
Hmm.
um, bossing people around. And that was sort of the way I would speak. That's the way I spoke to other people. And that was
Hmm.
one of the things that I had to really learn how to change. But I think one of the major ways of how change came in my heart is we did musical productions. And the purpose of the musical productions was basically to tell the story of the colored people to the colored people, because they seem to sometimes just know small parts of their own story, and
Hmm.
they have huge issues with identity. So one of the productions we did was Broken Shackles, and it was basically the epic story from the beginning of the colored people, from the indigenous people, um, roaming the land, hunting, to slavery, going into different things that happened in history, into apartheid, and up to where things were basically in today's age. And I I played the role of the master's wife, and
Hmm.
um, yeah, and I think it was during those kind of productions and the rehearsals, really just going through the mind and the moments that was really redemptive for me in many ways.
Wow.
Um, and yeah, I think many things I actually could only process after my time, after I left Worcester, in a sense,
Hmm.
because yeah, sometimes it was so heightened and in the moment of things.
Hmm.
I think it's only been the last 5 years that I properly processed, actually, but it was the
Yeah.
beginning of that journey for sure.
And
Yeah,
for the time and era that we're living in, 2021, with all of the racial conflicts that are going on around the world, what an authority this gives you, because you have been able to live with some of the horrors of the past, and yet you've been able to walk in reconciliation and redemption. And I believe that's even some of the reasons of why you've even started We Talk Story and your
yeah,
blog as Stories.
yeah.
Is there any more? Is there something you would like to even emphasize with why you started? We talk story and stuff.
Yeah, I think the real important thing is, I guess, for me myself, to process, in a sense, the things that I've learned and try to give it to other people that they can learn from it, and that it's tools for them to
Hmm.
engage in their situations, in their environments.
Hmm.
Um, I think a big part of it is, I know there's a lot of other Afrikaners that still have to go through this journey.
Yeah.
I had the opportunity to go through this journey, but I think there's many people that haven't even faced the reality that they need to go
Hmm.
through that kind of journey.
So true.
And I'm trying, yeah, in a sense, just trying to get them on a journey.
Wow.
I also think there's a lot of people out there that has mixed heritage, and the reality is that almost everybody around the earth has got mixed heritage of some sort. And
Hmm.
I think the big thing of that is that there's gifts that we get from our cultural identity, from the different backgrounds that we have, and if we can embrace the fullness of it, we have so much more to offer the people around us. But we tend to either just mush everything together and it just become watered down and
Hmm.
not really effective, or we sort of embrace one aspect of our cultural identity and just deny everything else.
Hmm.
And that's also missing a lot of the beauty and the gift that we actually have to offer other people. um, yeah, so that is also a part of the reason why I started with stories,
Wow.
or stories. Yeah, and there's a few more, but I think those are the important ones.
Louise, hearing what you've been sharing, like I said, there's so much that you could touch on, and something I think I would like to hear, because you're actually a full-time missionary. Hey,
Yeah.
and um, what is it like being an Afrikaner, uh, white South African, where your family, they may all be working jobs, and
Mm.
they're, living the 9 to 5 life, which there is nothing wrong with that. I'm currently living the 9 to 5 life right now too. but but how are you perceived, and how was it when your family saw you and your friends saw you working in this area of redemption and reconciliation?
Yeah. I mean, I
So
think there's
yeah.
there's always two aspects to it. On the one hand, people always ask you, so how do you get money to live? And that
Hmm.
is one answer.
Come on
And then
now, faith, hallelujah. Hmm.
yeah, and then the other side of it is, I think, to be honest, I think my family just shook their heads sometimes, because I think
Mm.
it's so hard to get your head around some of
Luis,
the
I
aspects
think it's
that
fair
we've
to
been
say
working in.
it's fair to say we have caused pain in our families' necks by the amount of times they shake their head at us. Like, I know what you're saying. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
just yeah. But I think the beauty of it for me now is, after a journey of 11 years now, is
Hmm.
I think, yeah, to see, to get the distance, and I think people to have the bigger picture overview of it. And even I think through stories, people maybe also get a bit of a better understanding of what our ministry has been about the last couple of
Mm.
years.
Wow.
Because I think for me it's difficult to to share about it and to
Come
talk
on.
about it. And I think the most effective way to talk about it is actually through people's stories and my story and your story and everybody
Mm.
else's story.
Wow.
And through that, I think it can be the best illustrated and understood is through stories. And I think
Come
our
on,
stories
Reverend. Come on, Luis.
stories is really so powerful, and
Wow.
nobody can take that away from you. I mean,
Yes.
knowledge and book knowledge is things that you learn and engage with other stuff. But what
Mm.
we live, our stories, lived reality, that is something else.
Wow.
And especially if we realize that the story that we've been living is causing a lot of pain in other people's lives. So how can
Mm.
we work on changing our story so that we can be a better blessing to other people around us and
Wow.
different people groups around us? So I think, yeah, that is the heart of stories and why it's called stories as well.
Well said. Well
Yeah.
said. Hey, I want to put you on the spot. I don't know if you remember. I'm sure you do. But when we were in Barbados, you shared your testimony at a church service. Do you remember that?
Yep, I do.
What I just can you tell me something about that moment? Like I remember, I think you were nervous, and I think I just remember laughing, being annoying as I am because I'm a little brother and annoying like that. But yeah, what do you want to share from that?
Yeah. I think, I mean, the thing about, yeah, that was quite a pivotal moment. And it was probably the first time that I really shared my story from an Afrikaner perspective.
Wow.
And especially in Barbados, which is people that is from a slave heritage. The people
Mm,
in the Caribbean, they were all people that came from Africa on slave ships, and Barbados was one of the first islands that people got off from on their journey from Africa.
mm,
And um, basically, sort of just telling my story from, I think the big thing of my story and the Afrikaner story, and sometimes even the German people's story, is, I don't know, we didn't understand always what was happening and the reality of it because we couldn't measure it against anything else. You have
mm,
to know that South Africa was so isolated.
mm.
No information really came in. I mean, I think it's hard to imagine in today's world with the internet giving us access to information from
Yeah.
everywhere. But it was cut off. The books
Mm,
was removed from the libraries. We couldn't hear radio stations and
mm,
television from outside. What we saw um, was our own programming, and it was translated and whatever. And I think for me in Barbados to try and tell that part of the story, I think, yeah, I
mm.
can't remember so much what I told, but I knew it was, there was something happening there. And I
Yeah.
think people came afterwards and told me that thank you for telling your side of the story, because I think it sort of given a little bit of an insight
Mm,
from the other side of their own story of the people that you, yeah, just I think the dynamics that's been
mm.
also happening in the Caribbean,
That's
um,
beautiful.
understanding things a little bit, um, yeah.
And there's such a heavy significance with that. I remember very clearly, and so um,
Yeah.
and and it was a big church. It wasn't a small church too.
No, and I think they were also
It-
live streaming.
Yeah, they were, and it was a big stage. I know. I even me. Yeah, it was crazy.
Yeah.
Man, honestly, I want. I'm just gonna talk a small bit. I want you to think of a story that you want to share, a kind of funnier story with cross cultural living team dynamics. And while you're thinking of that, I just want to once again say to the listeners, um, guys, there is so much gold that has been that has been shared, and there is so much more that needs to be shared. And so later on, there'll be times and opportunities if you want to actually reach out to Louise personally, because there is such richness in her story. As you have heard, so much on areas of reconciliation and redemption. She's worked in the Kalahari with the Bushmen with reconciliation. She's worked with dignitaries in South Africa. Like I said, she's traveled all over the world, and in her travels, she's been able to share her story of redemption and how being a white South African in the time of apartheid, how that has changed her personality and her lifestyle. But anyways, like I said, you'll be able to reach out to her, and we'll give those details out later. But Louise, do you have a story, like a fun story of something? And it doesn't have to be involving me. He ha ha. It can if you want. But Give us a story. Give us something good.
I should have thought about this question. I'm so
Ooh, I like putting you on the spot. Come on now.
well. I think there were just many moments when I was at the kibbutz of just misunderstanding at times that we just speak the same language, but we didn't speak the same language.
Uh-oh.
But I can't think of a specific situation. And I think other times have been around food. I mean, when we travel
Mm.
around to different countries, and especially, many times you just met or you just be with the people for that day and just
Mm,
honoring them by also eating and enjoying the food. And I think, yeah, maybe that. I think one of the biggest challenges in that regard was when I visited Madagascar, and the people really struggle there, and they are so honoring, and they would prepare
mm.
me my separate plate of food, and it
Wow.
was a huge plate of food, and
Oh yeah.
I,
Yeah, they're
I,
not shy.
I,
Uh-huh.
I struggled to eat a lot of food at one time. And it was such a big thing for me. Every meal,
Sticking it under
I
the
was
table,
thinking
hoping
of
that dog
how
would come.
how am I going to get through this meal? But I was alone at that time. I traveled by myself to Madagascar, and
Oy, oy, oy,
and
oy.
then another a guy came to visit from the Reunion Islands, and
Mm.
he then and I could kick myself. Why didn't I think about it earlier? He just sort of took what he needed and then sent the plate around.
Ay, yo, way.
It was such a simple solution, and I didn't think about it because
Learning,
I
learning,
felt I
learning
needed
the
to
ways, huh?
honor the people and eat the food.
Oh my gosh.
But I
Well,
think in Madagascar there was another situation. Was I was there over Easter weekend, and
mm,
we visited a festival, and there was thousands of people, but I was really the only white person there,
yes.
and I
Where's
was
Waldo?
so exposed. At one point, I went to hide in a car just
Oh,
for a little
Louise.
while.
That's
Yeah,
overwhelming.
yeah.
Oh my
You
word.
probably understand it a bit better than me, but that was really the first time I felt like that.
Oh, I love that. Well, Luis, what our listeners need to know is this: you and I have danced together. That's right. And
Yes.
so for you that are listening, so I'm obviously I'm a natural dancer, but when it comes to dancing in, like in a routine with the music, with everyone else, I kind of have my own style. Any hoozle, Luis and I, we danced a German folk song,
Yes,
and
yes,
we learned in Germany. And so, yeah, I mean, just remember dancing with you. Like, it's me. I mean, it's like literally lifting the person up. And so, Luis,
and you need to know
we've,
that Caleb is a tall, skinny guy.
yeah, yes, I'm telling you, we've had some intimate
Oh.
moments. And goodness, like our,
Yeah,
our times together have been always memorable.
yeah,
And it's been good. But listen, Luis, and to those that have been listening, uh, really this we could keep on talking because there's so much that we could touch on. But
yeah.
Luis, as your little brother, as your annoying cheeky little blue, man, it's been such an honor running with you on so many different levels. Where um, we were on Island Breeze together, touring,
Yeah,
and on South Roots together, and just we've always our paths have always crossed, and even now we haven't seen each other. I think almost 2 years.
that's
Yeah,
true.
almost
Yeah,
2 years, but I love the fact we've been able to continue to stay in partnership and stay close and just pursuing the kingdom of God through these
yeah.
ideas and stories. But I want to honor you because um, you're doing a new thing, and this new thing is something that it's been brewing for a while, and I'm
Mm,
so stoked and happy that you're putting things down and you're moving forward in this. And I believe that is the example that we need to see today. People who don't just talk the talk, but people who literally are like, all right, let's do something. So, Luis, you've done it and you're doing it and you're going far with this. It's touching many lives, and it's a blessing and an honor for me to be able to be a part of this with you.
mm.
So,
Yeah.
once again, in closing, thank you, Luis. Thank you so much. And to the listeners, I really want to challenge you and encourage you. Each and every one of us, we have different stories. We have different parts of our lives that have had higher significance than others, and parts where we can relate to even what Luis has shared. Um, about your own cultural heritage and your own identity, that it does have purpose and that there is a significance.
Mm.
And my trust and hope is that you have learned something through Louise's vulnerability. Louise, we thank you for your vulnerability. And
Thank
as
you.
I mentioned before, you'll be able to reach her. She has details, and if you want to email her, text her, just asking more questions, she is very open to that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Caleb. I just want to say thank you so much for today. It's been an awesome blessing. Thank you. If you enjoyed this episode, hit the like button and let me know what was the biggest takeaway of our conversation. Hit the bell not to miss the next episode. And if you are inspired to discover your cultural gifts, then click on the My Time to Shine 15 minutes free course to get you going.